Good morning and hello everyone. My name is Sandu. I am Professor PhD in the Faculty of Law and Public Administration at Suceava University from Romania. Today we will talk about some requests for ethical research. The problem of ethics in research and innovation is important because the level of ethics gives the credibility to both research institution and researcher itself. A postmodern interference between bioethic, epistemology and philosophy of science arise from the fields of ethics and especially of ethics of research, not only research on human subjects but all kind of research. Being a research with a high level of subjectivity, humanistic and social science research in particular, but all research in public health, in medical humanities and so on, and why not in medicine in itself, it will also load the researcher with the responsibility toward the social meaning of their own results. This responsibility, it's toward direct research and also indirect results of the research, such as when we talk about synthetic biology, for instance, we have responsibility toward the new organisms that have been created during this research, but also for environment and for the future generation of diverse species, because to put new species in the natural field could disbalance the natural equilibrium of the species. But come back to social research, about what we discuss mostly today. When we study a process or groups of peoples, we interfere with their own lives and with the development of the social systems. So by the very act of research, we change the natural development of social sciences, of social systems. Simply questioning about, for instance, is it acceptable to change something in the social environment? Either we talk about new technology, or we talk about some other change in social life, lifestyles, medicalization of social life, and so on. We make people aware. Because of the very act of research may make people aware of the change that has been done in their own life, and we should have responsibility toward this. Of course, responsibility toward the social meaning of the research and of the results include the correctness of using the methodology, the honesty, the presenting of the limits of research, including the epistemic and methodological ones, as well as the need of the subject's participation in the investigation. The ethics of research is based on the series of principles on which we mention the respect for the autonomy of the subject, the principle of beneficence, the principle of autonomy, to social justice, and so on. Sure, in the these principles come from Beauchamp and Childress, and we discuss a lot about these principles in another presentation, in another paper. So we just mention it in conjunction with the issue that arise from specific research in social science of today. For instance, the principle of autonomy is what to do to define the entire liberal modernity, being placed at the foundation of the Western culture in itself. So when we talk about autonomy, we just recognize that modern society is based on the individual rights and the individual rights to fulfill his own wishes, his own desire, and pursue of his own happiness. But during this last few years, during the pandemic, we are confronting with conflict of the values between those principles, and we value most the principle of beneficence at a social level, for instance, and non-maleficence that come against the principle of autonomy. And when we impose, in the name of public health, the beneficence against autonomy, we recognize value adrift between autonomy and beneficence, between individual and community. So today's society is more receptive to collective good than to individual rights. So this will make a paradigmatic shift in what we understand the relation between individual and society in general, and in science in particular. So as we mentioned in Bioethics in Crisis, or Crisis of Bioethics, our volume that was made in 2020, we live in a time of great change in approach of liberty, of individual rights, and in the crisis times, when the ethics, the traditional ethics, no longer function as good as we understand in the previous period before the pandemics, just because the humanity was confronting with new issues that we should solve it. So there was an important shift in cultural model that we do understand, but we should implement in our ethical practice, in our daily ethical practice, including a shift in how the research should be made, how the research will influence the society, will influence the environment, and so on. Just because we change our deeply understand of why we do research, what's the purpose of science and of technology in itself. Postmodern interference between bioethics, epistemology, and philosophy of science arises from the field of ethics, and the incorrect conduct of research may be based of deliberate fraud, but also on honest error of which the researcher was not aware, or questionable practice in research, among which the most frequent are the publication of low quality paper, neglect and superficiality in designs and conducting the research, in using the research procedure, in establish the critical apparatus and the citation of resource, and so on. And that this difference between fraud and honest mistake in science could be important to assure the credibility of research, of the science in itself, because in the public sphere, in Romania at least, there are a large mistrust in science. First, mistrust in science is derived from attitude of fraudulent practice that was made in last 20 years, plagiarism, falsifiers of data, and so on. And this practice were largely made known in the last few years, and the public put a blame to entire science, entire classes of science, just because some researchers, some academics used fraudulent means of the practice. But this practice was generalized in the public opinion, and was attributed to many researchers, and this diminished the perceived importance of the science. But the other source of mistrust is that the disruptive technology that appeared was not right explained, and its recrudescence of traditionalism models and disbelief in science that is not the public was not make aware about the consequences of such technology. When we propose to the public to express them their trust in science and their social acceptability of one or other technology, this could be appears as different. We generally could say, oh, we have trust in science because we learn science in school. But when we say about acceptance of technology, everybody say, oh, technology could lead us to disasters, ecological, nuclear, and so on. But everyone use TV, use internet, and trustable, untrustable, that's quotidian use of this technology, and that already change our lives, and we are already a different society than in the previous years. For example, since the period before the internet arrived, and internet changed how do we communicate with each other. The ethics of research is based on the series of principles. We mentioned autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and righteousness in access to the results and to the technology that was results. Scientific research, especially in the field of social sciences, in the postmodern acceptions, is considered to be loaded with researcher subjectivity. We mentioned this before, which will at the same time burden the scientist with the ethical responsibility toward the social meaning of this research, to correctness of using of the methodology, honesty, presenting the limits, and so on. The deviation from a mainstream, when the researcher finds it necessary in order to completely revolutionize the area of research, must in turn to be governed by laws and norms of research accepted or acceptable in the academic community. Precisely, the epistemological nucleus make research be declared scientific. In reality, the science mainstream is much more than the current of thought that is majoritary in the branch of science. The concept is thereof a cultural construct rather than a scientific current. We present here a series of exceptions of the concept of this mainstream. The elements of knowledge accessible to the public, in the case of a scientific mainstream, accessible to the target audience, member of the scientific community. Element of knowledge related to the institutional environment. This fragment was taken from our previous published paper in the book Ethics in Research, Practice and Innovation, published at EG Globals in the United States. But we published this before the COVID crisis, so we slightly update our idea, our view on these topics, and we try to update the presentation toward the experience of nowadays. So in the cultural sense, the term mainstream can be understood as an opinion current in the sense of majority culture opposed to what we call countercultural or minority culture. Within the scientific framework, the existing theory that have an increased number of followers will tend to be established as mainstream, and that using the instrument of peer review or peer control to dictate over the results, not only to the method. So we sometimes criticize this opinion because simply peer review procedures is not a guarantee of the quality of innovation. Even the peer review process is honest conduct, and the reviewer are honest scientific researchers. When the peer reviewers come in contact with new ideas that contradict their own opinions, sometimes there is a difficulty to understand the very novelty and minority currents that appear, and sometimes to reject the paper that are not in accordance with the reviewer's opinion or their own research results. But in the social science, as contradict this, the hard science, physics, mathematics, that could be a very different approach when we have a different research paradigm. If we use objectivist paradigm, and if we use a constructionist paradigm of interpretation of the data, it could emerge different conclusions that are not necessarily unscientific or that are not considered untrustable, but it could be different because we have different axioms that infuse and are at the top level of this of the research. So we have to understand the difference between interpretative paradigms and action in conjunction with what the paradigmatic shift is made for the research. And it's a unique ethical situation when we compare two paradigms, constructionist and objectivist one, especially in the social sciences, when we postulate that the social reality is objective and could be completely known with instruments of the science, of the social sciences. So we try to measure the reality, and we try to quantify it and to analyze with statistical instruments. When we say that the social reality is based on social construct, is based on what individual think that is real, not what is external to the individual and so-called objective, what is internal considered as being real, and say that individual creates his own reality, not in outside of his own mind, but in his own mind that dictates the social action. We have to understand what are the constructs that inform the behavior of the individual and or the community. So this could be not usual, not cannot be captured in the mathematical form as such as when we measure some external actions or some opinions. So we have to predict behaviors, we have to understand the deeply importance of what the constructs are for individual, and that's why we have an ethical issue about how we treat the social reality as objectivity versus subjectivity. Is it more a subjective reality that constructs our own behavior, or is more an objective reality that we can measure? And if we do not measure in itself as quantitative world and an objective external world, how is the inner world known with the scientific method, and how scientific could be considered these methods and this new epistemology. The constructivist and social constructionist epistemology has this ethical limitation about put subjectivity and subjectivity not only of the subject of research, but also of the researcher who interprets the act of the subject of a researcher, and how we can trust and in that subjectivity, in that double subjectivity of the researcher on one hand and of the people that are subject to research on the other hand. So we have to define this acceptability, social and scientific acceptability of social practice on the one hand and ethical practice on the other hand. The elements of affirmative ethics emphasize of the value of intersubjectivity. The collaborative creativity emphasizes both the social nature of the product of creating process as well as the process in itself, the collaborative creativity and peer evaluation of both elements with ethical value drive to collaboration and collegiality in evaluation, but also in distribute the results of the science. And this leads us to another value of ethical value of today's science, is the move to open science, not only to open publication and to open reveal of the results, but open and collaborative science in itself. When we analyzed, for instance, when was analyzed the genome of the COVID virus, that was an open access to the genetic codes of the virus and was freely published. But open science doesn't mean only to use open knowledge that was open access published, but also to involve the methods and practices at the large scale cooperation in the same science or in the other than the very large and different area of the science. So when we publish an article, then we do one part of research, for instance, the ethical research of how is acceptable a technology, and this is also published in a large research that was they have a core in for instance in medicine or in the physics or in technology. We as a researcher cannot, as a ethicist for instance, cannot or hardly understand the principles or the results of the technology or the hard science that was there in biology, in nuclear biology, or in the genetics, or in the informatics or blockchain technology and so on. But we understand how the research could be made and what's the implication of the research are. But what is classically known as criteria for authorship, to understand and to be responsible for all research, well, can no longer be applied. This change what authorship in itself means in this period of time in large class of research, where the open science is made through cooperation between specialists, between researchers in so different field of research that one cannot fully understand the whole text of the article that are working as authors or partial authorships and so on. That's change how we understand authorship in itself, how we understand what is to publish and what is to present the results, how to communicate the science and so on. So this was some discuss about what issues appear in the last period in the ethic of science and in the ethic of technology, and I hope I just made you to reflect about this and to discuss in the future about particular aspects of this topic. Thank you very much for listening to me, and if you have any questions, please address these questions to me here in YouTube channels or on the Facebook or in email and so on. Thank you very much and have a great day.